Hello, welcome back to the Jet Press Podcast. My name is Justin Fried, and I'm joined as always by my good friend Mike Luciano. Mike, how you doing, buddy? What's going on in this gorgeous, I guess, kind of gorgeous? The sun is out now. This nice looking Wednesday afternoon in the middle of June.
Well, I'm happy about it because also it's Juneteenth tomorrow, so a lot of you guys I know are getting off work, so that could be a nice day to head down to the beach or do whatever. So weather's good, feeling a little bit optimistic about the Jets, and it's the offseason doldrums, which means that it is the time to get really creative in terms of Jets content, and we're going to do that. We had a lot of fun in March doing our little Aaron Rodgers era Schadenfreude March Madness tournament that won with the Achilles tear, which I felt like that was a clear, prime Duke, like you knew they were going to go undefeated all the way and win kind of thing. So that ended up winning that. We're going to do another one. We're going to find out in the godforsaken history of this wretched franchise, who is the worst quarterback in Jets history? We are going to go dig deep. We have a whole 16 quarterbacks. It was hard to limit that list to 16. I could have made it a lot bigger if I wanted to, but we got that. And we're going to figure out who is the worst. We also got a couple quick minicamp updates we'll discuss before we get into that because they require discussing. But before that, thank you guys for tuning in. You can find us on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Overcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We are there. And you can subscribe on YouTube. It's free. You like the stream, that really helps. 99 cents membership, that really helps. Good way to support the show, help us make more content. As Brian Sternbeck says, David Fales is going to run the table on this one. David Fales is not even in the 16.
I have not thought of that name in a few years. I forgot the name David Fales even existed. That's crazy.
The San Jose State
great. That was Adam Gase's Tim Boyle. That's who David Fales was.
He bounced around. I remember in college he completed like 75% of his passes one year. He just added.
Where did he go to school? I have no.
San Jose State.
I didn't know that. I'm not gonna lie. Hand up. I didn't know where David Fales went to college.
Well, I mean, I might as well just kick you off the show right now. I mean, this is what
David
are we doing
Fales
here?
appeared in 2 games for the Jets. Didn't attempt a pass, but he did get sacked. I remember that.
That's impressive.
I vaguely remember him getting sacked. It was in 2019. What a guy. Weirdly, much like Tim Boyle, he's also played for the Jets, Dolphins, and Bears. Tim Boyle was also with the Bears. So he's had a weirdly similar career.
So before we get into that, though, we got a couple quick minicamp updates of some note and some repute. We're going to go start with, I think, perhaps the most significant development in terms of how the depth chart's going to look. That's the wide receiver 2 race because it is wide open right now. There's a situation where any one of maybe 3 or 4 different guys could end up as wide receiver 2 for the bulk of the year. But we have a clear favorite. And it is not Allen Lazard, who it seems like would have been the clear favorite if you asked everybody a month ago and before his buddy signed in Pittsburgh. Now it appears it's Josh Reynolds, who is apparently the wide receiver 2. He's the favorite to win the job. He's getting a lot of first-team reps. Reynolds is really, I don't want to use the term X factor because I don't think he's going to have an X factor-like impact, but he, I think, can really determine kind of what the ceiling is because you look at his production, and he's never had more than 618 yards in a season, but he was really buried on Sean McVay's depth chart, and Sean McVay kept bringing him back. He kept getting him targets. He kept trying to find ways to get Josh Reynolds the ball. He always liked him. Then he goes to Detroit, both when they were bad and when they were good, and he was pretty productive at a time when Jameson Williams was banged up and not living up to the hype. Josh Reynolds stepped up and filled that void and had one of his best years. Then last year, he just got Murphy's Law. I mean, Broncos gave him a 2-year contract. Didn't even make it through year 1 of that. He got shot, which also doesn't help your football performance.
Yeah.
A bullet in you. That doesn't help.
I agree.
Your ability to beat cornerbacks. So it's a gamble. Are we going to get 2023 Josh Reynolds instead of 2024 Josh Reynolds? But the early signs seem to say that 2023 Josh Reynolds is here, who I think is probably better than Allen Lazard if you get that version of him.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that we're sitting here and talking about if the Jets can get peak Josh Reynolds, then maybe their offense will be unlocked. But obviously, we know what the expectations are going into 2025. It's important to understand what we're working with here. But I think Josh Reynolds is a quality wide receiver. Like you said, everything that could have gone wrong for him in 2024 went wrong. I mean, obviously, there was him getting shot, that whole thing. That probably didn't help. But he also dealt with some injuries.
He really puts a damper on your year.
It certainly does. He dealt with some injuries. He spent time with 2 different teams. He signed with the Broncos, then ended up getting picked up by the Jags, and really just never got off. Never got off the ground from the start of the season. So I'm hoping that I think the Jets are by making this move. They're hoping that they're going to get that 2022, 2023 version of Josh Reynolds, which was, I think, a quality wide receiver. I mean, 2023 with the Lions, 40 catches, 608 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's reasonable production. And honestly, when you're looking at this wide receiver room and I'm looking at just what this Jets offense is going to look like in 2025, I'm not expecting wide receiver 2 to be a major part of the offense. It will be a part of the offense and they'll get their fair share of touches, but I don't think they will be outpacing guys like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson and maybe even Mason Taylor, if Mason Taylor is who the Jets think he is. I don't know how much the wide receiver 2 position is actually going to get targeted, but a guy like Josh Reynolds comes in. He has experience with Aaron Glenn, has experience with Tanner Engstrand. He also fits the prototype of what they're looking for at the wide receiver position, which is he is a good blocker, which Allen Lazard is as well. But what you're getting with Reynolds that you're not getting with Lazard is consistency, more so specifically referring to his hands. Allen Lazard has led the NFL in drop rate in each of the last 2 years. Josh Reynolds, for his career, has a 6.7% drop rate. That is significantly higher than Allen Lazard, or significantly lower, than Allen Lazard, who the last 2 years, I believe, been over 18% each of the last 2 years, something along those lines.
Can you get higher than Allen Lazard? Other than
statistically, we'll see if Arian Smith can give him his run for his money. But statistically, over the last 2 years, no, you can't. Allen Lazard has led the league in drop rate each of the last 2 years. And it's not just a snaps thing. It's not just a playing time thing, because in 2023, when Reynolds was a featured part of that Lions offense, he was targeted 75 times that year. He only had a 9.4% drop rate, which is actually the highest of his career, but still below league average, which usually hovers around 10%. So you get a lot more reliability, consistency with Josh Reynolds. The ceiling is not super high, but he's a floor raiser. Pretty much like what the Jets were hoping like Jermaine Kearse would be a few years ago. And I hope, and I think Reynolds could be an even better version of Jermaine Kearse with this Jets team in 2025.
We got a running back update, too, with Breece Hall, who has been the subject of trade rumors since before the draft. I mean, we had a whole show talking about Ashton Genty at 7. If he's there, what do you do? Do you trade Breece Hall? And he wasn't there at 7 anyway, so it was a moot point, but had to talk about it because you can't keep everybody. It seems like the Jets have 2 guys they're for sure going to keep, and then after that, well, who knows on Jermaine Johnson and Breece Hall and some of these guys. And Breece Hall, I don't think is going to be traded, especially as Aaron Glenn has supposedly beforehand has said, don't worry, you're the man, you're our guy, we're not trading you, which sounds a lot like Dave Gettleman. We didn't sign Odell and trade him. It sounds a lot like
Rosen,
that.
Josh is our guy.
Josh is our guy. Yeah, it sounds a lot like that. I've got my hairs raised, and I got to say, especially because Aaron Glenn has not shied away from the fact that he legitimately wants to give Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis a shot here. Especially Allen, I think, in particular, with how powerful he runs. I still don't think this gets done, but if it's like week, what week is the trade deadline?
It's 7, right around Halloween. I forget.
Right around Halloween. So let's say week 7. If it's week 7 and Breece, if the efficiency is not there, because he's going to go pile up the yards, he'll get carries, he'll get receptions. Like the yards from scrimmage is never a problem. And he had 1,300 yards last year from scrimmage, and that was regarded as the down year for Breece Hall. But if the efficiency is not there, if the 4.1 yards per carry, if that comes back, or if it's worse than that, and Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis have a good game or two in a row, the Jets are probably not going to be very good. They're probably going to be 2-5 or something like that. They're going to think about it, and teams are going to call about him. And right now, if you had to ask me what are the odds he gets traded before the season, I'd probably say 85 he doesn't, 15 he does. I think it's legit 50-50 at the trade deadline. I think it's a legitimate coin flip. And it all depends on Breece because he could play well enough and shut everybody up, and then the Jets keep him. But if he doesn't, the Jets are going to say, well, why are we betting over backwards for another Joe Douglas guy?
100%. I think you nailed it. Breece Hall is one of the, if we're talking X factors, we're talking, guys where I feel like they have so much to prove going into 2025. Breece Hall is at the forefront of that conversation. And a lot of what happens with his future with the Jets is going to be determined by how he performs this year. I think we passed the point where he would get traded before the season. I would be pretty surprised. I'd be very surprised if he was traded before week 1. But going into the trade deadline, I think it's a real possibility. Hall is on the last year of his deal, and if the Jets don't see a scenario where they look to extend him in the offseason, yeah, they're probably going to want to trade him. They won't likely get much for him in return at that point because, one, if they are trading him, it's likely his value has diminished even more. And 2, if they're trading him, he's still got only a couple months left in his contract. So what could you possibly get for a running back who might still want to get some sort of a payday on the open market? I don't think they get much. But I do think Aaron Glenn and the Jets handle this the correct way because we've talked about it before. The Jets had trade conversations around Breece Hall going into the draft. Those weren't just rumors. That wasn't just talk. These trade discussions were had. To what extent, we don't really know, but conversations were had. The Jets, to my knowledge, were not shopping Breece Hall. They weren't going around the team saying, hey, do you want Breece Hall? Which is why I believe Aaron Glenn when he says, I don't want to trade Breece Hall. That's, according to Breece Hall, that is the conversation that Glenn had with him. I don't know when this conversation took place, but it was sometime probably around the draft. Breece straight up asked Aaron Glenn, hey, do you, or I think it was Aaron Glenn. Breece said that Glenn called Breece to clear the air and be like, hey, do you think I want to trade you? Breece is like, I don't know. And Aaron Glenn was like, I don't want to trade you. I want you to be here. You're a running back. Now, it's likely that conversation was had once they realized the trade probably wasn't going to happen, that nothing was going to materialize. But I think that's the correct way to go about it, to clear the air and put it in Breece's head, or at least get the thought out of his head that he thinks he might be traded. He might not have a future with the Jets. I think that's probably the best way to handle this. I'm glad that Aaron Glenn, who is somebody who has been vocal about how he believes in a lot of one-on-one conversations with players, it's very much a part of his coaching philosophy. He did that here with Breece and kind of shut down those rumors as much as you can. Again, I don't think any trade is going to happen before the season starts, but like you said, Mike, if things go a certain way in the first few months and maybe Breece Hall doesn't get off to a great start and Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis are showing something, yeah, maybe the Jets do make that move and maybe they do decide to move on from Breece. But I'm glad that Glenn was able to clear the air and we kind of shut down that talk, at least for the time being.
Gives him some plausible deniability too. Like, hey, we didn't want to then, and then he played a little worse than we did. It gives him a little bit of kind of a get out of jail free card a little bit. And then we got 2 edge rusher updates. One that I am not surprised about. One that is a little, I don't know if it's flash in the pan or not, but it's at least encouraging to see. The first, let's get to Will McDonald, who was really beefed up. I mean, he's over 250 now. He's weighing in at, which when he was drafted, he was in the 230s as an edge rusher, and he was playing almost like a defensive tackle in colleges last year. I don't know why they were doing that at Iowa State, but they were doing that. And what we saw last year, because again, this was a controversial pick from the jump because of the direction they went in at the time they went in. But if nothing else, he proved to be a good pass rusher at the NFL level. I mean, 10 sacks is 10 sacks. Wherever you get him, it's 10 sacks. But what really kept him out of being a guy that the Jets can't live without defensively now for the future is not only is he a bad run defender, I mean, he is just exceedingly bad at defending the run to the point where even the casual fan may not know who's a great run defender, who's not from just watching on tape. You could see on tape, like, man, he's getting bodied. Getting up to 250 won't help him fix that totally, and I don't think he's ever going to be a great run defender, but all he's got to be there is okay. If he's just okay there, which I think this weight will help him then, and he doesn't really lose any of that spin or that burst or what made him a good pass rusher, Then I think you start talking about now we can give him an extension. I know he has some leverage because the Jets have like no other edge rushers other than Jermaine Johnson, who is a complete question mark right now. We don't know where he's at athletically. If he keeps his pass rush just as sharp at this weight at like 250, because you always wonder about, a boxer moves up a weight class and then he gets the crap beaten out of him and he's got to move back down again. You worry about, can he play at this weight? If he answers those questions, sky's the limit for this dude.
100%. I think anybody who's watched the show, you know, Mike, that I've been more critical of Will McDonald than I think a lot of Jets fans. I don't want it to just be because like I was not super happy with the pick either. I just think there is so much room for him to grow and for him to become a more impactful player. Because right now, I feel like he's who people thought Breece Hall was with the Jets and is last year, right? At least Breece Hall's last year, where people kind of pigeonholed Breece, and I'm not going to talk about Breece Hall, what he just did in 2024, because very different player. I'm talking specifically 2023 Breece Hall with the Jets. He was pigeonholed into a guy who could only be a pass rush specialist and can't play on running downs because he was that much of a liability. I always thought that narrative was a little false, at least based on what he did with the Jets. I don't think he was a good run defender by any means, but I think he held his own enough that he can be handled or trusted with handling more of a 3-down role. And we saw that a bit in 2023. With Will McDonald, I don't think that's the case. Unfortunately, they don't have the edge rush depth to play other guys there, but Will McDonald is, in my opinion, or at least last year, was borderline unplayable as a run defender. Fantastic pass rusher. We saw that potentially at 10.5 sacks. A lot of that sack production came early in the year, but I also think some of his best pass rush games came later in the season when those sacks weren't necessarily piling up. Very, very talented pass rusher. We know that. The run defense, significant liability. Like, again, borderline unplayable. He had the lowest run defense grade of any edge rusher to play at least 500 snaps last year. That was 39.5. That was a full 4 points worse than any other qualified edge rusher, which there was like 60 qualified edge rushers that played at least 500 snaps. He also had the highest missed tackle rate, over 34% missed tackle rate for Will McDonald last season. That is basically unplayable. You want to look at how,
every 3 tackles he makes,
right,
he misses one.
You want to point fingers at why the Jets' run defense was as bad as it was last year. Will McDonald was a major, major part of that. So going into 2025, you look at the Jets' edge rush group right now. It's Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, and a bunch of question marks. A bunch of guys like, Michael Clemens, who we kind of know what they are at this stage, and they're very underwhelming depth contributors. And then flyers like a guy like Rashad Weaver, who we'll talk about in a moment, like the UDFAs of last year, the Braden McGregors, the Eric Watts. There's just and Tyler Barron, 5th round pick. There's a mix of no names and unknowns behind them. So the Jets are going to need Will McDonald, especially with Jermaine Johnson working his way back from torn Achilles. They're going to need Will McDonald to be more of a true 3-down edge rusher and hold his own on running downs this year. And the fact that he went into the offseason, bulked up, added around 15, 16, 17 pounds of weight based on reports is huge, because I remember the conversation we had about Will McDonald last year at this time. And it was, the conversations were about how Will McDonald was struggling to put on weight and how the Jets were wanting Will McDonald to bulk up. And since they drafted him really in 2023, they were hoping that he could put on that extra weight. Cause like you said, Mike, he played at Iowa State at around he was 236, 235 when he was drafted. You are not going to hold up as a full.
Nicky and Amori played safety. He was 225.
How heavy was Cam Chancellor? He was probably around that. You are not going to play as a full-time 4-3 defensive end in the NFL, really as a 3-4 outside linebacker. You can't really play that either at that size. And we've seen that the last 2 years. We've seen it become an issue. So him finally being able to add that weight, because for some guys, it's not easy. It is not easy bulking up. And Will McDonald was finally able to do that. I don't know how he did it, but I'm glad he finally did. So if he can take that next step and become a more well-rounded run defender, then even if the pass rush takes a slight hit, that's perfectly fine. I think it's a net positive for the Jets.
You'll hear this in scouting parlance a lot. Is this frame filled out yet? Right. Will McDonald's frame is not filled out yet or the other concern is sometimes guys fill it out, but they don't add what they call, quote, good weight, which is muscle. Some guys will add weight, but it's fat and it doesn't impact their play at all. It just makes them more sluggish. Right. So good for Will McDonald. Also good for Rashad Weaver, who is one of these guys. Aaron Glenn, Darren Muggia filled out this roster with 1-year veteran guys. Prove that you can last in this league. Derek Nottie, Byron Cowart, Jay Tufele, Rashad Weaver, tons of these guys where they're not very well regarded necessarily as players, but maybe if this is their last shot, maybe they can get whatever potential they have out of them. And Weaver, you don't want to say disappointing for a guy who's picked at the end of the 4th round, but 5.5 sacks in 4 years. All of those sacks came in one season in 2022 with the Titans. Not a particularly effective rusher when he was out there. And talking to our buddy Justin Mello, who runs Titan Size and is very connected with the Tennessee Titans over there, had some attitude problems, was not very well regarded in the building. So it looks like something's turned around for him because he has been dominating so far in the early stages of minicamp, looking really fast, looking really aggressive. I don't think he's going to necessarily play a huge role this year, but that edge 4 role is wide open. Michael Clemens, I know you guys don't like him, but he's the 3rd edge rusher this year behind Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson. You can't remake everything overnight, so that's where they're weak this year. He's 3rd. 4th, who knows? It could be Weaver, it could be Tyler Barron. I might prefer it would be Tyler Barron. Maybe Barron and Weaver over Clemens, who knows? But the fact that the Jets are getting stuff like this out of a guy who this is the last house on the block for him. If he translates this, because again, his game probably looks good at this time of year. It's like how Arian Smith was starring, but you can't really press him and it's all speed. So I get why guys like that, speed guys, look good nowadays, but we can only go on what we've seen, and what we've seen from Rashad Weaver is very good so far.
Yeah, listen, it's the spring. It's June. It is nearly impossible to actually evaluate trench play. So I don't want to make it seem like anything we're talking about, any of the reports coming out about Rashad Weaver are overwhelmingly like meaningful. For lack of a better term, we have to talk about stuff. So we'll talk about Rashad Weaver here. But I do think, based on what we've heard, he was standing out the most out of all the edge rushers, at least in that crop behind Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson, who's not practicing at the moment. He got a couple of sacks in the open media portions of OTAs and was continuing to impress in minicamp. Again, take that with a grain of salt. But the optimism that I can offer for a player like Rashad Weaver is based on what I know about him. I do think he's already in a better system for his skill set now with the Jets than he was with the Titans for most of his career. This is a guy, if you go back to his time at Pitt, he played at 260. He was playing at almost 270 at a point at Pitt. He was playing 4-3 and even inside as an interior rusher at times. So when he went to Tennessee and they moved him to outside linebacker, it was a different kind of, role that he had to adjust to. Now, 2022, he showed some promise. 5.5 sacks that year as a rotational edge was definitely by far his best and most productive season as a pro. But then
the only year he's had
production, because then that year or that offseason, they went and signed Harold Landry. They brought in Arden Key. So now, there was a lot more competition joining that pass rush room in Tennessee. And as a result, Rashad Weaver never really got another chance in Tennessee. He was waived by them last August, picked up by the Texans. He had a practice squad stint with another team too. He played in like 3 games with the Texans last year. Didn't do much. But I think the optimism here, and he talked about this a little bit. There was a quote, I forget who aggregated it. So I'm doing poor aggregation on my part. I think it was Dennis Waszak of the Associated Press. I think he got a quote from Rashad Weaver where Weaver talked about how now he's more comfortable and happy being a true defensive end again, which he was not in Tennessee for most of his time there. Will that be enough for him to earn a role? Will it be enough for him to make the actual 53-man roster? I don't know. He's one of the many one-year flyers that the Jets have taken. A weird one, too, because they signed him very early in free agency. They signed him first couple of days of free agency. And it was like, this is a guy who was a practice squatter last year. So this is a weird move. But yeah, I like the pickup. We'll see if he can become something. I think there is a path to playing time if he continues to stand out in training camp, because it's a wide open edge rush room outside of the top 2 guys. And again, who knows how effective Jermaine Johnson is going to be early in the season? Who knows if he's going to be handling a full workload, even though he is expected to be ready for week 1. I'm not sure he's playing 60-70% of snaps that early. So a guy like Rashad Weaver will have every opportunity to prove that they deserve a role this summer. We'll see if he can do it.
To be a fly on the wall for those Rashad Weaver, Carter Warren practice sessions.
That is true. I guess we also have to remember
Jason Pinnock was on that team too. Him and DeMar Hamlin were in the secondary.
That's true. Well, I guess we do have to remember too, when Rashad Weaver is impressing at Jets OTAs, he's probably going up against, Obina Eze or Chukwuma Okorafor too. So it's not like he's going up against the cream of the crop.
Oh God, is he going to quit after that now?
He got beat by Rashad Weaver? I hope not.
So let's move on to the big segment of the day. I have found 16 of the nastiest quarterbacks you have ever seen in New York Jets history, and I have put them in a bracket, and we are going to go find out. Finally, we're going to answer the age-old question. who is the worst quarterback in Jets history. Let's start right at the top with a pretty juicy 116 matchup.
Gonna start it. Oh, start it. There we go.
I am going to start it. Okay, I need to hit a button for it. Now we're really getting going.
So for the audio listeners, this is Zach Wilson as the 1 seed, which totally
Zach
valid.
Wilson, number 1. Aaron Rodgers, number 16. It was him or Favre. And I thought Rodgers was actually probably better than Favre statistically, but Favre won more games.
Full disclaimer, Mike, you put this list together. I do want to know what the criteria is before we get into it, because obviously Zach Wilson with the Jets was worse than Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. I mean, this one's not going to be a competition. I guess
it's a little bit of both. It's terrible play. It's impact on the franchise.
Okay.
It's hopelessness when you felt him go out there. Disappointment.
Okay. Overall, how it affected our mental health. Okay.
The totality of everything.
Okay. Well, look,
the suck quotient.
I think we know who's going to win this, but I will say, for the disappointment score, low key, is Aaron Rodgers a bigger disappointment for the Jets than Zach Wilson?
Oh, he's the biggest disappointment in franchise history, yes, but he at least was a real.
No, I know. I'm not saying obviously Zach Wilson's going to win this, but I'm trying to make a case for Aaron Rodgers if he were to win, which he's not going to. But Rodgers, I think you can make the argument that he's a bigger disappointment. I mean, obviously Zach Wilson was the number 2 overall pick, is the highest the Jets.
One of the worst picks in NFL draft.
It's the highest the Jets had drafted a quarterback since Namath was he was AFL draft, but he was what, 3rd overall?
He was AFL, and I think
was he technically?
It was like 9th or 10th or something like that.
I think he was 3rd overall Namath. So
I think he was 3rd in the NFL.
He was 1st overall in the AFL draft. Okay. Well, so then Zach Wilson, the highest drafted Jets quarterback in their history since Joe Namath. So there was obviously a lot of hype around Zach Wilson. I think you could still argue Aaron Rodgers was the bigger disappointment, but obviously if we're going on this list, the worst quarterback in Jets history, it's got to be Zach Wilson, obviously.
Got to be Zach Wilson. We got an 8-9 matchup. Also, I know, just so you know, we have a younger audience, that most of our viewers are kind of like RA younger guys. If you're an older Jets fan, feel free to let your comments in the chat fly, because you have lived through a lot of this. And I'm sure you're going to go and tell us young whippersnappers.
Look, we didn't watch Bubby Brister.
We got an 8-9 matchup here. Sam Darnold and Bubby Brister.
And we did not.
So Sam Darnold, obviously, incredibly disappointing, was thrown to the Wolves in New York, had nothing to – now, thrown to the Wolves, he also sucked on top of being thrown to the Wolves. So you can't just let him elude all that responsibility there. He had 5 touchdowns, 39 interceptions with the Jets, a 13-25 record. As has been proven in Minnesota, ended up being a pretty good quarterback, but he had to go through a lot of sucking before that in Carolina. Now, Bubby Brister, who had a long career as a backup, he was with Denver for a while after Elway, I remember, too. Now, here, let me just show you how bad he was with the Jets. Pro Football Reference has a stat called approximate value, which I'm sure Justin knows. It helps you weigh performance against different eras. Sam Darnold in his career with the Jets had 17. Like that 2019 year, it was 6. That's kind of an average year. A Pro Bowl year is like maybe 12-ish, kind of, just to give you an approximation. Do you know what Bubby Brister's was with the Jets?
Can AV go into the negatives?
-4.
I didn't even realize AV can go into negatives. That's crazy.
-4.
That's crazy.
He started 4 games, 1-3. This was in 95. This is one of Rich Kotite's 4 wins was him. 1-3 record. 54% completion, 4 touchdowns, 8 interceptions with some fumbles thrown in. Terrible. And also, he's just kind of emblematic of the Kotite era Jets, because he felt like the nadir for a lot of it.
Yeah. This is an interesting one because, look, I never watched Bubby Brister play. All I can go on Bubby Brister is what I've heard. I can look at his stats. I have never watched film of Bubby Brister playing. By the way, that one win that he had was a 4th quarter comeback and a game-winning drive. So shout out Bubby Brister for that win. But yeah, 1-3 record, 4 starts with the Jets. He was there as a backup for 1 season behind Boomer Esiason during one of the darkest years in franchise history. But if we're going on who did more damage to the Jets, and, there's obviously context here of Sam Darnold. We all know we're not going to blame Sam Darnold for everything that happened in New York and all of his shortcomings. But I would say that the guy who was drafted 3rd overall and was brought in to be the guy and indirectly led to Zach Wilson, which indirectly, as Brian pointed out in chat, also led to Aaron Rodgers. I think I would say Sam Darnold probably did more damage overall to the Jets than Bubby Brister, who was just there for 1 year.
I would say too. Yeah, he was worse though.
Yeah.
Darnold also 3 years of.
It depends how you want to go about it.
5-12 matchup now. Brooks Bollinger, who holds a place in my heart because my first memories of the Jets are watching this guy suck. And this is when they were good. They made the playoffs the year before he started, the year after he started. So this is when they had Herm Edwards and they were good. 7 touchdowns, 6 picks, a 2-8 record. Not good.
No.
Really bad, in fact. Helped ruin a playoff team and helped them go 4-12, which led to a couple good draft picks, but still. And then you get Neil O'Donnell, who statistically was a pretty good quarterback with the Jets if you just look at raw touchdowns, interceptions. The problem was this was, again, in Kotite era. They signed him right after he got the Steelers to the Super Bowl. Remember he threw those 2 picks where Larry Brown was the only guy on the screen? You're like, what is he doing? He went to the Jets after that and gave him a ton of money in free agency and just started horribly. 0-6 record with 7 picks in his first year. Then 97, he's actually okay because of Parcells, but he moves on anyway, and that turned out to be the right move for Testaverde. Probably the biggest free agency mistake in Jets history because he came in with a lot of hype and just did nothing. So, but he was better than Brooks Bollinger, who was just terrible.
Would we say bigger?
And had no redeeming factors as a quarterback. So,
would we say bigger free agent mistake than like Tremaine Johnson? Obviously it's
he was a quarterback. This was like right at the beginning. He was like their first big one. He didn't win a game his first year as a free agent starting quarterback. That's pretty bad.
So it was 5 years, $25 million is what the Jets gave O'Donnell. I don't know how relative that was. Like, I don't know what that made him in terms of highest paid quarterbacks in the league at the time.
Well, that was right when it started. That was pretty top of the line.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, again, this is a situation where Neil O'Donnell is a better quarterback. Even with the Jets, he was at least a starting caliber quarterback, probably. Brooks Bollinger, not at all. I would say just for the infamy of it, it's got to be Neil O'Donnell. Like nobody in Jets history, when they're thinking of the worst quarterbacks, is thinking of Brooks Bollinger. But they will talk about Neil O'Donnell because of the mistake that honestly the stigma associated with Neil O'Donnell being part of that Rich Kotite era, being part of the worst era in Jets history, arguably, and just like you said, it's one of the biggest free agent mistakes the organization has ever made. Whereas they didn't invest nearly as much in Brooks Bollinger. So while he was worse, I think we got to go Neil O'Donnell here.
Let's talk about a guy who had 18 touchdowns and 38 interceptions in his professional career. And that is Matt Robinson, who was their backup throughout the 70s when they had Richard Todd. He was often pushing Richard Todd for reps because he got off to a really slow start. This was like a Lou Holtz era Jets. That's how bad he was. He lasted for a while, but 18 touchdowns, 38 picks in his career. I don't think we need to really tell you that is not emblematic of good quarterback play. And then Kellen Clemens, who it's easy to forget because he was around as a backup forever. Kellen Clemens was a second-round pick of the Jets in 2006 and really never, again, he wasn't very good. 5 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and his really only extended playing time in 8 starts, only threw 5 touchdowns. But he also never really got much of a shot. Young guy, bad offense. Like at the end, they made the Favre trade. Never got a shot, but you pick a guy second round, he has 5 touchdown passes for you over a multitude of years. That's not what you want. And Kellen Clemens, he gets a pass a lot because he didn't really play, but people forget what a high draft pick this guy was. He was a top 50 pick, and he did nothing with it.
Yeah, I think this one's an easy pick for me. It's got to be Kellen Clemens. I don't think Matt Robinson, in the grand scheme of Jets quarterbacks, is even that bad. Like he was a 9th round pick. So he was brought in basically just to be a camp arm guy, ended up taking over as a starter in 78 after Richard Todd got hurt and actually led the Jets. Like he was 6-5 as a starter that year. And they were 3-11 the year before that. So he actually was okay. He had some moments as a starter. And I believe going into 79, he was also named the starter up until he had an injury and then Todd took back over. But yeah, I don't think Matt Robinson is that bad. Whereas Kellen Clemens feels like the Geno Smith who never had his Geno Smith moment. 2nd round pick, lasted probably a decade in the NFL as a backup, just hanging around.
Yeah, he was with the Rams and the Chargers forever.
Yeah, he was the Chargers backup for a while and
even went to the Chargers just like
Geno. Yeah, exactly. And he just never had his late career Geno moment like Geno has had now. So but yeah, the Jets invested the 2nd round pick in Kellen Clemens. He never even developed into a semi-competent backup for the Jets, I think it's got to be Kellen Clemens, other than Matt, over Matt Robinson, who at least stepped in as a competent spot starter for the Jets.
I think we got another one that's going to be a pretty easy boat race here. Browning Nagel and Mark Sanchez. Browning Nagel, another second-round pick here.
Yep.
How does 8 touchdowns, 20 interceptions sound for a
Not
career?
very good. Not very good.
Not very good? Okay, I just needed some extra confirmation on that. Now, the interesting part is they picked him 34th overall in 1991. Yep. Do you know who got picked number 33 overall?
I do not. Year? Was it also a quarterback?
It was Brett Favre.
Oh, that sucks. That sucks.
So narrowly missed out on Brett Favre.
Jets legend, Brett Favre.
And they got a guy. Have you ever met another human being named Browning in your life?
Baron Browning.
No, first name Browning.
No, I don't know. First name Browning. No, I don't.
And then Mark Sanchez. Look, it's weird. As Sternbeck says, it's depressing and hilarious how he's a beloved figure. I mean, those 2 AFC Championship games,
here's the thing.
We're holding on to them, and they count, and he won 4 road playoff games, and you got to factor that in. But also, you think of what those Jets teams were and how much meat on the bone they left. Like, that team was the epitome of if they got a quarterback, watch what if they got Aaron Rodgers, watch what happened. That team was that to the max. And Mark Sanchez not developing into a franchise quarterback because he just didn't. He had the arm. He always had the arm. He never had the accuracy. Nope. And that kind of kneecapped the last time the Jets were good was that. But at least he had some moments. Browning Nagel never had any moments.
Here's the thing. I almost object to Mark Sanchez being on this list because I would argue that if you were making a list of the top 10 quarterbacks in Jets history, Mark Sanchez has to be on that list. I don't think you can make a list of the top 10.
I think he is, yeah, but I mean, he's not high. He's like 10 or 9 or something.
Low key, I think he might push for the top 5. Like I remember doing a ranked list of the all-time Jets quarterbacks.
So we got Namath, O'Brien, Richard Todd.
Yeah, Pennington you could probably put ahead of him. Pennington, Testaverde, and then I think Sanchez absolutely has a case. Like Fitzpatrick had the 1 year of record setting and then was dog shit and is not held in high regard by Jets fans. I mean, once we're getting down there, we're saying Josh McCown, Richard Todd, like it's not pretty once we get past that top 5. So I think Sanchez legitimately has a case to be like 6th. So I'd almost say he should not belong on a list of the top 16. With that being said, it's easily Browning Nagel. It has to be him. And I think he could go a long way in this tournament because he didn't have necessarily the pedigree of like Zach Wilson because he was a 2nd round pick, but he was awful, dude. He was really bad.
And now we got a list of guys who didn't really play very much.
Really quick, as Brian says, Sanchez being in the top 10 would have largely be in part due to his tenure more than his play and the lack of competition, of course. Yes, absolutely. It's very much like he got an A in the group project type deal, and it definitely speaks volumes about how bad the Jets quarterback history actually is. But man, if you win 4 playoff games with a franchise and, with a franchise like the Jets and you lead a team to back-to-back AFC championship games, or I don't even want to say lead, but if you go with the team as the starting quarterback on back-to-back AFC championship games, given the history of this Jets team, you have to be up there. And I will also note that Mark Sanchez played pretty well in those playoffs. It's not like Mark Sanchez was getting completely carried in the playoffs.
Playoff Sanchez was a real
playoff
thing.
Sanchez was actually good. It's the rest of it was not very good, but
the color-coded play sheets.
If Sanchez played awful in those playoffs, I don't think they advanced as far as they did. So he at least did something to get them to that point.
Now the 11-6. This is a barn burner. Glenn Foley and Tim Boyle. Now, Glenn Foley was around the Jets for about 5-6 years, again, with the Kotite era, and then Parcells as kind of a backup. 5 years in total, a whopping 53% completion, only won 1 of his 8 starts, 10 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, a passer rating of 63.2, which is terrible. Didn't last long after that. Local guy, though, from Cherry Hill, South Jersey guy, but not a very good quarterback. And then Tim Boyle, need we say more? The Fail Mary, the Hail Satan play, whatever you want to call it. Probably the worst quarterback in recent history to get extended run. Like, not counting guys from the 40s, 50s, 60s. Like, he's that level of bad. Didn't play for the Jets very long, but my God, did he make his mark.
Can we back it up? Who called it the Hail Satan? Who called it that?
You did.
I called it Hail Satan.
You did. Maybe Brian Sternbeck did. It came from the podcast.
That actually does sound like something that would come from this podcast. You're right. I was gonna say, I'm like, I don't remember seeing that elsewhere. I don't remember.
Somebody it generated from this podcast.
Hail Mary was what I remembered, and then
it's make your own.
We might have spun off the Hail Satan from that. I think, yeah. But I think this one's got to be Tim Boyle. I think Glenn Foley was a respectable backup. He was a fine backup at a time when
he wasn't good.
That's why I said respectable. He was a respectable, quality enough backup who was there for half a decade, and at a time when the Jets were terrible and my quarterback play around the league was pretty terrible, he was at least fine. He was NFL caliber. Tim Boyle is, we've said this before, I think he is maybe the worst quarterback that has been given this many chances at the NFL level. I don't know if I've seen anything like this.
And he got another one.
He's 30 years old, I think, already. And now he's gone his, 8th team, 7th team. He's with the Titans now.
I think he's older than that. No, he's 30. He's on the Titans right now.
And if they trade Will Levis, he has an actual chance to win the backup job, which is just it's just unbelievable, man, how he's getting these chances.
Unbelievable.
I don't know if Tim Boyle is UFL caliber. So I will say Tim Boyle absolutely takes the reins over Glenn Foley here.
Let's go 7-10. Seldom used. Guys, this is a tough one. Bryce Petty and Trevor Siemian. Trevor Siemian, again, had a -2 in that AV last year. We were begging. Remember how much we begged?
We were begging for Trevor Siemian. That's how bad. That's the damage Zach Wilson did to our mental health, is that we were begging.
We were begging for, and he was worse than Zach Wilson, which is crazy because he actually wasn't even that bad in New Orleans, but he was worse than Zach Wilson. And then Bryce Petty, I legitimately thought that this changed the way I evaluate quarterbacks for a while, because it made me swear off, not air raid guys, but that Baylor system. It made me swear off because of him, because big arm, moved well for his size, kind of accurate if he had time, just could not run an NFL offense. Didn't have the capacity to do it. Inaccurate because he got pressured a lot. Just a mess. And I thought he had the arm to do it, but I'm very disappointed, I think, in Bryce Petty.
Yeah, I think this one also has to be Petty. I feel like there's an extra harm to it. It hurts more when it's a drafted player, when it's a homegrown player, and you have some optimism around it. Whereas with Trevor Siemian, it was like, this is a veteran they signed off the street to their practice squad, and maybe he could be
4 touchdowns, 10 picks, by the way, for Bryce Petty.
Yeah, and maybe Siemian can be a reprieve from Zach Wilson, was like our hope. Bryce Petty was at a point competing for the starting quarterback job. There was a point where Bryce Petty was in legitimate competition for being the starting quarterback of the New York Jets. Now, he was absolutely terrible. I was at the game where he got, it's not a favorite player, Bryce Petty, but it's one of the most memorable when he got sandwiched between Ndamukong Suh and Cameron Wake. That's one of my most notable memories of Bryce Petty. But yeah, I think it has to be him. Siemian, what were the expectations for Trevor Siemian? Not that the expectations were...
He somehow didn't
meet him, but not that the expectations were considerably high for Bryce Petty, but I think they were a lot lower for Siemian.
15-2.
This is another good point from Brian. Petty's part of the reason the Jets didn't draft the QB in 2017. Absolutely. Which also relates to one of the names.
Well, we got Jamal Adams.
Relates to one of the names on this list as well.
Who became Garrett Wilson. So.
Yeah, but again, one of the names on this list also relates to why the Jets didn't draft the quarterback in 2017.
Now, maybe I'm cheating a little bit because I'm putting Christian Hackenberg this high, but you have to put Christian Hackenberg this high. For what they thought he was going to be, for how against the grain they went to take him where they took him. And then, I'm not even kidding, it was weeks in, as close as we're into minicamp right now, they realized, we made a huge mistake. We made a huge mistake. This guy can't play at all. Never played for the Jets. I was at the one game he was active where he didn't play. That was week 17 against the Bills, right after they fired Rex Ryan. Cardale Jones' his only start. I was at that game. And Geno Smith, as has been proven, pretty darn good quarterback, I would say, in the NFL. But it just didn't materialize with the Jets. I think because of Geno's post-Jets career, showing that he's actually pretty good, I think this is a Hackenberg.
It's easily Hackenberg. I will say one notable omission that I just noticed. I would put Tim Tebow on this list somewhere. I don't, if you want to call him a quarterback with the Jets, which he was.
Yeah, I should have put Tebow.
He barely was a quarterback with the Jets, but just because of
barely was up. It was, if we're doing the worst punt protectors, then yeah, he could be on there.
That we should do an extremely obscure ranking like that, where it's like the worst, I don't know, worst H-backs in Jets history.
As we see the subscriber count just tick downward in real time.
This one has to be Hackenberg. He is the only guy on this list who never actually appeared in an NFL game. He went to the short-lived AAF after the Jets started the season. I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he threw a touchdown in his entire.
He got benched for Johnny Manziel. That tells you where he was.
And I don't think, I'm going to double check this, but I don't think he even threw a touchdown in the AAF. He did not. He played 3 games.
Zach Mettenberger outpaced him by a lot.
He played 3 games with the Memphis Express in 2019 and did not throw a single touchdown. He was benched for Johnny Manziel and eventually Brandon Silvers. He threw 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in the AAF, and of course did not play with the Jets. And that was the last we heard of him in football circles. It has to be Hackenberg. Gino, at least he had some moments with the Jets. He had that perfect pass.
You saw where there's something. You're like, just
the
more
perfect
of
passer rating game that everyone was like, oh my God, Gino might be the guy. Clearly that wasn't the case, but at least he did something with the Jets.
He became the guy for Seattle for a pretty long time. Now the 1-9 matchup in the second. This is a doozy.
Fun one. This
is a fun one. Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold.
This is the 2021 debate all over again. This is January.
Oh, no.
This is January 2021, Mike. We have gone back in time to January and February of 2021 when the Jets were deciding.
Oh, when we didn't have these bags under our eyes from Aaron Rodgers.
Nope, we didn't. And we didn't know what Zach Wilson could be. We were foolish. We were naive to the BYU football world, and we had hope. We still had hope, Mike.
The state of Utah and what they did.
Yeah, this is Zach Wilson versus Sam Darnold. I mean, there's still a clear winner here. It's got to be Zach Wilson, which I don't want this to be a victory lap for the pro Darnold truthers in 2020, because I do still think that moving on from Sam Darnold after that 2020 season was the correct decision.
There was no chance he was ever going to succeed in New York, especially with the team Zach
with the number 2 pick in a quarterback class that was perceived to be loaded. You had really no choice there. You had to.
And then they passed on the guy who's their quarterback now anyway.
So they end up with Zach.
They should have taken Fields to begin with, because, I mean, Trevor Lawrence is obviously the best one of that. But Fields, it wasn't that it was the fact that so early on, because everybody knew Trevor Lawrence was 1. They're like, oh, yeah, Wilson's 2, and then maybe blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, why is he 2?
And that's even the consensus. Most NFL teams also had Wilson as 2. Remember, what gets overlooked in that is that was the
the pro day throw, man.
What gets overlooked is that was the COVID year. And so that the whole 2020 draft class or 2021 draft class is a mess, because teams had very limited scouting resources compared to previous seasons. So, I mean, I'm not going to.
Well, I mean,
this isn't trying to absolve. This isn't trying to absolve the Jets of blame, by the way. I'm just saying that it was a very weird draft process that season. And a lot of teams went in and made picks that they probably didn't have the full scope of the situation that they might have had they had more resources if we weren't in a global pandemic at the time.
Sam Darnold is obviously worse than Zach Wilson, says the voice from the past.
Yeah, man.
Let's get on to our 5-4. Another go. Neil O'Donnell, Kellen Clemens.
This is a fun one, actually.
So 2 different ones. You have a drafted backup who never played and was terrible when he did play, and a high-profile external free agent who helped the Jets go 1-15 at the end of the Rich Kotite era, is regarded as one of the worst free agent signings in NFL history. I actually saw a list where I think he was number 5 on the all-time worst free agent list. So that's how bad that contract was regarded. He ended up having a career after that. He's with the Titans for a long time as Steve McNair's backup. But this is a tough one. I think this is like kind of, what do you value more in this ranking? Because Neil O'Donnell played more and was a little better, but the expectations placed on him were much greater.
Dude, Kellen Clemens lasted 12 years in the NFL. That's crazy. That's
12 years. Like, you see that, you wonder, why does he get 12 years and then other guys who were better?
That is pretty wild. 12 years. I immediately, I'm leaning Neil O'Donnell on this one. I think if we're going on this list, and I'm just thinking of basically most damaging to the Jets, most damaging to the organization, most damaging to the psyche of Jets fans, most damaging to the vibes around the team, it's got to be Neil O'Donnell, and most infamous. I think Neil O'Donnell is one of the most infamous quarterbacks in Jets history, which is saying a lot because there are a lot of infamous quarterbacks in Jets history, as we're figuring out in this list. Kellen Clemens,
Kellen Clemens did throw 5 touchdowns as a top 50 pick.
Yeah, but he's still, I feel like he's just another name in a long line of second round pick Jets draft bust quarterbacks. Like,
I mean, that's high. That's bad, though.
It is bad.
At least Neil O'Donnell under Parcells had an okay year, and then he moved off him, but he had at least had the okay year. Kellen Clemens was never even average.
I think this is a case where legacy matters. If we're going to do the ESPN NBA talk here, I think legacy
Did you see
matters.
The other day, by the way, the ESPN did what's Dak's legacy?
Yes, during the NBA Finals.
During the finals. It was June 17th yesterday.
Yep. Stanley Cup Finals are going on. NBA Finals are going on. Both have been awesome series.
Ohtani came back for baseball. Yankees and Mets are good.
Right, and we're talking Dak Prescott's legacy. But if we're talking in this case, Neil O'Donnell's legacy with the Jets versus Kellen Clemens' legacy with the Jets, I think Neil O'Donnell's is worse because I think Neil O'Donnell has the stigma of being that terrible free agent signing with all those expectations on him. He is representative of one of the worst eras, if not the worst era in franchise history, whereas Kellen Clemens objectively was worse, and they objectively invested a very high draft pick into him. But I wouldn't say that his legacy is as bad as Neil O'Donnell's because there's mostly because he gets washed out in a sea of other Jets draft bust. When people say name a Jets quarterback draft bust, people like the first name that comes to mind, really the first 3 names aren't going to be Kellen Clemens. But if you say name a free agent Jets draft bust at quarterback, Neil O'Donnell might be the first name that comes to mind. That's my
I'll go with O'Donnell.
Okay. That's my argument for Neil O'Donnell.
I feel like Clemens is, I think because he was the backup on the Sanchez team, so people kind of have some Pavlovian positive association with him. But
I would love to know if people have different opinions about that in chat, especially those.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Especially those who lived through the Neil O'Donnell era and by proxy the Kellen Clemens era, because I didn't get to live through the Neil O'Donnell era, but when we're talking worst Jets quarterbacks, Neil O'Donnell's name comes up a lot more than Kellen Clemens.
And now this one's not going to get any easier. Oh wow, this is a Browning, Nagel, and Tim Boyle.
Disgusting. This is
now. I just want to tell you something right now. Combined in the NFL, these 2 quarterbacks have 12 touchdown passes. 13 touchdowns and 33 interceptions.
I gotta see. Was Browning Nagel like good in college?
Yeah, he was at Louisville. I remember it was a weak quarterback class outside of Favre.
It wasn't even.
He was okay. He was okay. I think is the 55% for him in college.
55% completion percentage over 2 years. 32 total touchdowns, 21 picks. He had 16 touchdowns and 10 interceptions in 89, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions in 90. I know we're grading on a curve and it's a different era.
I'm going to be honest. I'm still going to go Browning Nagel.
No, I'm also going to go Browning Nagel over Tim Boyle. I think he was more damaging and has more.
Boyle didn't play enough.
Boyle, you know what Boyle's legacy is going to be in 15 years, which is, again, a crazy conversation we're having about Tim Boyle's legacy. But Tim Boyle's legacy for Jets fans in 15 years is going to be Aaron Rodgers' water boy. Like, that's what people are going to remember. People are going to remember him as such a terrible quarterback and is like, why was he on the roster? But they're going to remember him in relation to Aaron Rodgers. And
not even. Look how many teams he's been on without him.
Yeah, but I'm talking Jets fans. Jets fans remember Tim
yeah.
Boyle as Aaron Rodgers' buddy, as Aaron Rodgers, is the guy who would get him water, right? The guy who would carry his suitcase. Whereas I think Browning Nagel is bad on his own right. He can stand on his own 2 feet of suckery, whereas Tim Boyle can't really do that. That would be.
Sternbeck says, I didn't live through that era, but though being a Jets fan has aged me at 5 times the rate of a normal human.
That's valid.
You look at this face, I'm actually only 14. It's just aged me to the point.
Let's
go on to our
buddy. Our buddy Connor Long is actually like 3 years old. Then that's what that means.
Yeah, this poor guy.
He's just already
blew his whole childhood on the Jets. 7-2. Another doozy of 2 great Jets draft picks. Bryce Petty and Christian Hackenberg.
This is the first that were teammates, I believe, on this list.
They were teammates. Bryce Petty was viewed as better by the Jets than Christian Hackenberg because he played over him. Petty actually played. Yeah. Though I'm not sure how much that helps his case because he was so bad. Hackenberg, again, there were a lot of quarterbacks the Jets drafted who never played. Jordan Travis, obviously, one. James Morgan. But Hackenberg stands alone because he was expected to be
a second-round pick.
A franchise quarterback almost.
Right.
He never played. So this is because Petty was so bad.
Mm-hmm.
And you tried so hard to justify it because he had the arm. You're like, man, if only he gets something around him, but it just never worked. I don't know, man.
It's Hackenberg.
I think it's Hackenberg.
It's Hackenberg. As Mark Williams also pointed out earlier in chat, Hackenberg didn't play as a second rounder, and then they passed on Mahomes partly because they had Christian Hackenberg. That was
yes.
In 2017, the Jets did not draft the quarterback, partially because they had Christian Hackenberg, and they were okay with the young guys they had in that QB room, which were Christian Hackenberg and Bryce Petty. Hackenberg just did a lot more damage to the Jets organization than Bryce Petty. He will live in infamy as one of the worst draft picks in Jets history. He is one of the highest draft picks.
Worst non-first round picks ever.
Yes, easily. He's one of the highest draft picks ever, I believe, to never appear in an NFL game, at least draft picks in the modern NFL era, whatever you want to define that as. I mean, there are not many players drafted as high as Christian Hackenberg to never play a single snap in the NFL. Like, that's remarkable that not only did he not make it with the Jets, like even Ja'Kai Polite, who was cut by the Jets, he played in the NFL.
I think the Raiders signed him for like 10 minutes and cut him once.
Yes, that was when they had Gruden. Or was that Gruden?
Gruden, yeah, because quarterback camp. He's like, oh, this guy's good.
Exactly. Oh, Gruden would love Hackenberg. That is the exact type of quarterback Gruden would love. And
I feel like he's like Mike Shanahan, where it's like, let me get crappy quarterbacks on purpose. Then when they're good, I look like a genius.
That's what Sean Payton tried with Zach Wilson. It didn't really work.
And it didn't
kind of worked with Bo Nix though, but not to diss Bo Nix. But yeah, it's easily Hackenberg, which means we only had one upset in the first few rounds, in the first 2 rounds, and that was a tough one with Neil O'Donnell, Calvin Clemens. Our top 3 seeds are all still alive.
Now we move on to the final 4.
Yep.
The final 4. Here's one for you.
Mm-hmm.
Zach Wilson and Neil O'Donnell.
This is how you trigger 2 different generations of Jets fans in one bracket.
Yeah.
This right here.
And they go, you weren't there for O'Donnell, man. Like,
no, I mean, look.
O'Donnell was bad, but he at least had a good. The second year was halfway decent.
He was at least fine. These are actually the 2. I would argue these are the 2 faces of the. Well, no, I would say maybe Adam Gase and Rich Kotite are the 2 faces of the 2 worst eras in Jets history. But these are the 2 quarterbacks who kind of exemplify the worst eras the most. Obviously, Zach Wilson didn't play with Adam Gase.
Even Lou Holtz, like the early 70s after Namath.
I feel like Adam Gase era. Well, okay, I guess Adam Gase era and Zach Wilson era are 2 different things because Zach Wilson didn't play for Adam Gase, but it kind of just more so continued that era. I don't know. These are the 2 worst quarterbacks of their like respective terrible eras. I think it's still Zach Wilson, obviously.
O'Donnell almost got to a Super Bowl. He was a real quarterback. He got
even with the Jets, he had a season that was better than anything Zach Wilson put on paper with the Jets. And also the team around Zach Wilson was probably better than it was around Neil O'Donnell, especially the defense.
Now here we go with 3-2.
Yep. Final semifinal matchup. This is actually a really tough one.
Browning, Nagel, and Christian Hackenberg.
Oh, man.
Oh, my God.
Very, very difficult. So on one hand, you got a guy who didn't play at all with the Jets, as we established. Never played.
Now, keep in mind, they're both second-round picks. Browning, Nagel was drafted higher.
Yes. Nagel was, though, as you pointed out, 1 pick behind Brett Favre, right?
Behind Brett Favre.
So they didn't have a chance at Brett Favre. So it's not like they missed out on Brett Favre because they drafted Browning Nagel. And it's not like the Packers even drafted Favre in the first place. They had to trade for him. But, yeah, man, this is tough. I think I lean Hackenberg, and I'll explain why.
I might lean Nagel.
Okay, let me make my case, and then you make yours. All right. My case here is I think the ensuing domino effect of the Jets drafting Christian Hackenberg has, in a way, led us to where we are now, and the Jets have still not recovered from that pick. They draft Christian Hackenberg. As a result, in 2017, they don't draft a quarterback. They don't draft Patrick Mahomes. They don't draft, I guess thankfully in hindsight, they don't draft Deshaun Watson, but at the time that seemed like it would have been a good decision. They don't draft a quarterback that year. They eventually draft Sam Darnold the next year. Sam Darnold doesn't work out. That leads them to drafting Zach Wilson, which eventually leads to Aaron Rodgers, and that leads to where we are today. So
you could do that with any.
No. Hold on. Let me finish. You could trace all of that back to Hackenberg. You could trace him back even further, but you could trace it back roughly to Hackenberg. Browning Nagel, the Jets did recover from that. It took the Rich Kotite era to do it.
That's the thing. It led to Rich Kotite.
Well, Christian Hackenberg led to Adam Gase. There's your Rich Kotite for that era. But the Jets recovered from that because Bill Parcells came in 97 and boom, They got to the AFC Championship game, and they were actually a good NFL franchise. From 1997.
Aaron Glenn is Parcells, that would change your thought?
Well, we don't know if he is. From 1997 to 2010, the Jets were a very respectable franchise. They were a good NFL team. Then it went to shit. Christian Hackenberg is almost like a line in the sand that you can draw and say, here was a chance the Jets had to turn everything around in 2017. And they didn't because they had this guy on their roster. And I think that ensuing domino effect, the fallout from that is why I lean Hackenberg. But I would love to hear what your
I just can't put a guy Hackenberg, having never played, is both why he got this far and why I can't put him over Nagel. Because, he never played, but it's how destructive can you be without having ever played?
I've just explained how destructive he could be. It was very destructive.
Yeah, it was destructive. Nagel played and was destructive to a point. This guy was almost a first-round pick. He was the top end of the second round.
Who
20 picks.
Who was the QB that took over for Nagel? Was it Esiason? Was it Boomer?
What?
Was it Boomer Esiason that took over for Nagel eventually? Was that the next starting quarterback they had after
At the
Nagel?
end, yeah. They got Boomer, and then he had the good year in 93, and then Kotite, and then it was done.
I would say again, if we're going 15, 20 years from now, who is going to have a worse legacy with the Jets? Who are we? I know I'm turning this into legacy conversations. It's the only way to objectively do one of these. And it's not even objective. It's all subjective. But I think if we're going 20 years from now, who are Jets fans going to remember more in infamy? I think it's Christian Hackenberg. I don't think Browning Nagel will be quite as much as Hackenberg. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm biased.
They might remember Hackenberg more, but also that might be a recency thing.
That's what I might be biased.
If the timelines were switched and Hackenberg played in the 90s and Browning Nagel played now with those numbers.
Well, the numbers would be, it's a little different too, because relative to era. Well, yeah, it's an interesting hypothetical. If Hackenberg was drafted back then and he didn't play, maybe, but I you know what? I think you might be right partially, but I will say that, I think the reason that Hackenberg got as much negative coverage as he did is because also NFL media and social media was a lot bigger in 2016 when he was drafted than it was in 91 or whatever when Browning Nagel was drafted.
That's what I'm saying. Everybody will talk about guys being the worst picks ever, then they forget a guy from the 90s who was worse because of recency.
This is interesting. That's an interesting point. I would love to know.
I don't know.
I am still leaning Hackenberg, but I get where you're coming from. I'd love to know if Chad has any takes on this.
I'm trying to find a coin I could flip. Kind of thing.
We could just flip it. We could just Google it, flip a coin too.
All right,
I don't know. Flip. Are we really leaving this down to a coin flip?
No, I can't. You know what?
I think if you asked 10 Jets fans on the street and asked them to name the top 2 worst quarterbacks in Jets history, more would say Hackenberg than would say
more would say Hackenberg. But again,
Hackenberg
never played. He didn't do anything.
But if just
Hackenberg's more a front office mistake than him being bad, I think sometimes.
Well, yeah, but that's part of it, is it not? Is it not are we not evaluating the opportunity cost of them making that pick and then the what that led to? Because we've factored that in for all these. That's why who did Tim Boyle lose? That's why Tim Boyle lost to Browning Nagel, because Tim Boyle's worse than Browning Nagel. But Browning Nagel did more damage to the Jets organization than Tim Boyle did. I think Christian Hackenberg did more damage.
I'll go Hackenberg. This was a 87-86 in triple overtime.
This was
that's as close as you can get. That's as 50-50 as you can get.
That was quadruple deuce on match point.
If you post that on social media, you must make note of that, because that is
just a little asterisk next to it.
Dead even. Really now here's the granddaddy of them all.
Okay.
Baby.
Look, do we want to entertain
Zach Wilson and Christian Hackenberg?
These are the 2 poster childs, at least in recent Jets history. If you think of the poster childs for Jets incompetence, Zach Wilson, Christian Hackenberg are the forefront of those conversations. And it's not even just at the quarterback position. These are 2 of the most laughably bad draft picks that any NFL team has made in the last 25 years. And I don't think that's an exaggeration to say, for 2 very different reasons. One, of course, Zach Wilson was drafted 2nd overall, and there was a lot of hype around that pick. And of course, he completely failed and never lived up to even an ounce of that potential. Whereas Hackenberg, it was a laughably bad pick because it was somebody who most teams thought was, and most analysts thought was, a day 3 guy, maybe a late day 3 guy.
And I saw some undrafted. I remember
that as well. And the Jets drafted him in the second round. And
51. I said, what?
Used him as justification for not drafting other quarterbacks. And just
that was McCagnon's first draft, was it?
2016, no, 2015.
2015
was his first draft. 2016 was his second.
Darren Lee and Christian Hackenberg, first 2 picks.
Yeah. Who else? Was 2016 was also Justin Burris, right? Was that Brandon Shell?
That was all right. You ready for the entire draft class?
I was just pulling it up, but
Darren Lee, Christian Hackenberg, Jordan Jenkins, Justin Burris, Brandon Shell, Sharon Peake, Locke Edwards.
Okay, so best pick actually is probably Brandon Shell.
Jordan Jenkins.
Shell was a couple rounds later and was at least actually weirdly enough, Shell had a better post Jets career than Jenkins did, which was surprising to me.
Jenkins, By the way, Tyreek Hill and Dak Prescott went later in that draft, and Joe Thuney. So Justin Simmons, Matt Judon, just a couple of
Listen,
they did it take instead of
we know McCagnon was terrible, by the way. We know that. But did I ever tell you I met Mike McCagnon? Did I bring that up before?
You did not.
I met him at the same event that I met Tanner Purdom, which that's a whole story. I forget if I've gone into that on the show before.
Yes.
I met Tanner Purdom and his whole family, former Jets long snapper, and that was crazy. But that same night, when I was leaving the stadium, after I had just hung out with Tanner Purdom's whole family, which that was crazy, and then got to see him after the game, which was cool. This was 2016, so I was young. I wasn't even writing at the Jet Press yet. But I was
still optimistic for the Hackenberg era.
Yeah, I was like, maybe this Hackenberg guy can work out. I don't know. But I ran into Mike McCagnon and his wife were leaving the stadium, and it was like,
okay, Manish. Jeez.
Well, I know I wasn't like stopped because I was hanging out where like the players were, because that's where I was talking with Tanner Purdom and his family. And then after they left, I was like, my phone was dying, but I was trying to like get in contact with my friends. And I just saw Mike McCagnon and his wife walking out of the stadium, and I was like, that is Mike McCagnon. That is
meeting them or seeing them?
What?
Is that meeting or seeing?
No, I went up to them and I was like, "Hey, I'm so sorry." I was like, "I'm so sorry to interrupt, whatever." But like, can I get a photo? And I took a photo. I took a couple photos with Mike McCagnon.
They're probably worth like 50 cents now.
It was I remember his smile. Okay, dude. I remember his smile being like so awkward. Like it was just like a half smile, and I was like, okay. I felt bad interrupting. I think that was that.
He probably gets that a lot.
But. That was the game, actually. Second time I'm referencing this game. That was the game that Bryce Petty got sandwiched between Ndamukong Suh and Cameron Wake. I was at that game. That was the game. I sat with Tanner Purdom's whole family, and then after the game, I met Mike McCagnon. I got autographs from. Let's see. Do I remember? I got Leonard Williams was the big one. Leonard Williams, Robbie Anderson, Lachlan Edwards. Was another guy who's, I don't know if this is interesting to you at all, but also this is an insane shout out. I would guarantee there's nobody in chat that remembers this player. There was a player in the Jets named Craig Watts, who is a backup guard who I don't believe ever appeared in a game for the Jets. I got his autograph as well. And then
that reminds me of when, not to make this all story time here, but I remember a friend of my grandfather's, his son, his name was Mike Chris. So like Chris, like the Christopher, Mike Chris.
Sure.
And he pitched in the majors for like 20 games or something. And my dad and my uncle went to go see him. He played for the Tigers and the Giants for like a little bit. And he was pitching for the Tigers at Yankee Stadium. And he gives him this autograph. And they're like, oh, man, we got this guy's first autograph. He's going to be a big star. And he gave up like 7 runs in 3 innings and got sent back down to the – it's like that was it. I never saw him again.
There was one more name as well that I got an autograph from, Mike. Do you remember Nick Marshall? Do you remember who that is?
The Auburn quarterback with the Hail Mary.
Yes. Nick Marshall.
Then became a quarterback, yes.
Who became a corner in the NFL and was a returner for half a year with the Jets. That was the year as well that he was on the team at that time, and I also got his autograph. So that's a wild, ridiculous story.
Back to Wilson Hackenberg. Now that
it's Zach Wilson.
Corner with Mike and Justin is over.
Zach Wilson is the answer. Zach Wilson is the worst quarterback in Jets history. That's the answer.
It is.
It's Zach Wilson.
Like again, it's Zach Wilson, but I thought both Nagel and Hackenberg would have a case to be made for number 1 because I thought Wilson as a quarterback is better than both of them. So it's the impact. It's the impact of Wilson because Wilson's obviously a bad quarterback, but Hackenberg never did anything. Brownie Nagel threw 3 times as many interceptions as touchdowns. Wilson's better than that. And he did win some games where you're like, okay, there's some promise here. But then, man, it just not only did it unravel, but I mean, look at what we've been talking about for the last couple of months. Look how bad it unraveled. So
It's the impact and the opportunity cost, because the Jets invested the second overall pick in the draft.
If Zach Wilson was taken in the late first round, not number 2, would he have won this? Is it just because he was number 2?
I don't think so. And I think the Jets may have moved on even sooner than they did from Zach Wilson if he was a later first round pick. The fact that he was a second overall pick and they had invested as much into him as they did, and that he was, deemed to be the guy, I think it's a very different story. Although the context of it would still be the same, say for some reason the Jets didn't draft a quarterback at number 2 that year. They had still moved on from Darnold. That would mean they probably traded up back into the first round and took Wilson at the end. I mean, obviously it's a pure hypothetical, but I think there'd still be a lot of expectations on him to be the guy, but I don't think it'd be nearly as lofty as if he was taken second overall. So it's a different conversation then. But because he was second overall, because the expectations were there, because they used such a significant asset to draft him, it has to be Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson is the worst quarterback in Jets history.
Looking at this, I think we did pretty good. Honestly, I think any of the top 3, has a legitimate case to be the worst.
Yeah, I think Wilson, Nagel, and Hackenberg are all in the conversation, but it's Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson's the worst quarterback in Jets history.
So thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Jet Press Podcast. You know where to find us on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Overcast, and you know where to subscribe on YouTube. Justin, sign us off, sir.
What a fun trip down unfortunate memory lane that was.
That's the graveyard memory lane.
The graveyard of Jets quarterbacks. But anyway, until next week, thank you all for joining us on the show today. Follow Mike on Twitter at @Luciano. Follow me on Twitter at Justin T. Fried. Follow Jet Press at the Jet Press. Download the Jet Press podcast wherever you get podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can also become a member today. It is 99 cents. It's a great way to get your comments prioritized in chat, and it helps support the show. We stream live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all for listening to Jet Press Podcast. I've been Justin Fried. That is Mike Luciano. We'll see you guys next time.
At least Zach Wilson finally won something.